Good morning and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. The voice of the college athlete has never been more needed than it is today. The platforms that exist to amplify that voice seem to be growing every day. I want to use this platform to have a discussion with a former college athlete whose profile has risen in the world of the NCAA and in front of the U.S. Congress where he testified in February of this year. Kendall Spencer is a 2020 graduate of Georgetown University's law school. Before attending Georgetown Law, Kendall was a track and field athlete at the University of New Mexico. He won a national championship in the indoor long jump in 2012, earned first-team All-American honors, and in addition to numerous conference honors, and he has since competed in the Olympic trials and hopes to compete in the 2021 Tokyo Olympic Games next year. I invited Kendall prior to the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing in which Senators Richard Blumenthal and Cory Booker outlined their college athlete Bill of Rights. So we start the podcast with listening to Senator Blumenthal's description of what those rights look like, and then Kendall and I jump right into the conversation.
About the Autonomy 5 and the NCAA's proposals, but I want to send this message, which I think many of us feel is all important. We want reforms with real teeth and real protection for the athletes. Put the athletes first. And colleges ought to hear that message loud and clear. College athletes must receive fair compensation for their work. They deserve to share fairly in the revenue they create through their photos, their jerseys, their merchandise promotions with their name, image, and likeness. This is a matter of equity and equality. Athletes have to be protected against exploitive practices that may be inadvertent, but still pernicious. And there is a racial justice dimension here. It is a dimension that involves racial justice, economic justice, healthcare justice. Our nation is in the middle of a profound reckoning on the systematic racial injustices of our entire society, and it should not be lost on any of us that collegiate sports that generate the highest revenue are disproportionately played by students of color. That is an undeniable fact about today's college athlete world. Our current system denies these students access to the revenue that their labor generates. And that is unfair, unjust, and it reflects racial injustice as well as economic injustice. And that's why today I'm proud to announce that I'm working on a framework with Senator Booker for a college athlete's Bill of Rights. This framework succeeds where the NCAA has too often failed, and it centers on the rights and welfare of college athletes. Our framework empowers and protects economic rights of athletes. It allows students to market their name, image, and likeness rights, both individually and on a group basis. It would also ensure that students have the opportunity to negotiate revenue-sharing agreements with athletic associations, conferences, and schools. It would empower and protect students' right to an education, enable them beyond their academic and athletic career. Currently, fewer than 6 in 10 college students graduate in 4 years, and only 55% of Black male athletes from the Power 5 conferences graduate within 6 years. Our framework would provide college athletes with commensurate lifetime scholarships to give them more time to complete their degrees. We create and empower transparency and give athletes the right to hold accountable their colleges. Our framework would create an oversight panel with the regulation of agents and third-party NIL deals to athletes and make sure they have a real voice. And finally, the framework protects the health and well-being of the student athlete. Nothing is more important than health. It is unacceptable that college athletes continue to die, literally die, from heat-related illnesses, and athletic programs still fail to report on all collegiate sports injuries, including concussion. We require comprehensive health care coverage and support with sports-related injuries. Perhaps most importantly, this framework also includes essential health and safety measures with real enforcement mechanisms. Enforcement is key, as I know from my own career in law enforcement.
Kendall, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
You and I just had a chance to listen to the opening statement from Senator Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut yesterday in the Senate Judiciary hearing on college athletics. And it was quite comprehensive, his initial opening statement. So give me your thoughts on it.
So, you know, having been in those rooms before, I think Senator Blumenthal outlines a lot of really, really good steps. I like the way that he highlighted key focus areas for there to be real change. I think taking it a step back from that, and I know you and I have spoken offline about this before, it's really getting an understanding of the current state of intercollegiate athletics, right? You know, there's a lot of talk about fairness and making sure that equity is maintained in intercollegiate athletics and doing right by the student athlete. But my thought has always been that in order to do that, you have to first evaluate the current state of intercollegiate athletics beyond the public perception of things are unfair, right? Which means, you know, believe it or not, you are going to have to work with some of these institutions, and you are going to have to work with the NCAA to really get a picture of what's happening, right? Because if not, the goalpost is going to continue to move, right? If you go in with this notion that, you know, college sports are unfair, student athletes are treated, you know, unfairly, and they're taken advantage of, without first looking at the key information to how they're treated, to what student athletes are currently getting, both academically and athletically, you're not going to be able to evaluate the changes that need to be made on a permanent basis. And, you know, one of the things that I don't want to see happen is I don't want to see us trying to fix the same problem every other year because we didn't take those initial steps.
Okay, so what would be the first thing you would want to do in trying to assess that value?
I think the first thing that I would do, and you know, again, my views here, you know, I'm sure many people would probably disagree. I think I would take it back to step one, which is, what do we want intercollegiate athletics to look like? What purpose do we want it to serve? I think just like a lot of the issues we see in the tech industry, I think the original framework to how intercollegiate athletics began is vastly different from what we see today, right? The surrounding situation to what college athletics looked like, you know, 60 plus years ago is different. You know, you are dealing with revenue sports. You're dealing with some sports that make no money at all. They cost the institutions money. So I would want to take a step back and really evaluate, okay, well, what do we want this machine to do? What purpose do we want it to serve? And then step two for me would be, okay, what are we doing now? Right? What are, you know, we can break it out by divisions. We could break it out by, you know, FBS and FCS schools. But I would then want to get a framework and an idea of what student athletes are getting now, not what the public says they're getting, not what, you know, different administrators say they're getting, but I would want to see the hardline facts. How are they being educated? What's the training they're getting? What do the scholarships look like? I would want all of that together to come as a detailed illustration. And then I would make changes accordingly with those facts in mind. But those steps have to come first for me.
Would you do that across all Division I, Division II, Division III, just Division I, just FBS? How would you do that?
So I would do it across all divisions, because, and it's a great question you asked, because that's exactly why step one has to be, what do you want this to look like? We've got 3 divisions, we've got 32 plus conferences in Division One. All of them right now function a little differently. And I think when they were created, that wasn't the idea people had in mind. And so you have to take it on a division approach. You have to take it to step one and ask yourself what we want it to look like, what we want it to function, because that's going to give you really the trajectory to the type of changes you want to make in the first place, right? If the idea, hypothetically speaking, if the idea was, hey, let's give, all these kids from, diverse backgrounds and various levels of socioeconomic statuses, these great opportunities in education, if that's if that's goal number one, then that tells you a lot about what your priorities are going to be and how you want to structure things. But you have to ask that question first, because as we know, the way Division One functions and the way Division Three functions are entirely different. Scholarships, are either there or they're not. The revenue is either there or it's not. And that is what really is going to help you color in those lines where we've seen currently things are a little blurry,
Yeah, absolutely. When I think of college athletics, I think of a world that surrounds college football. It's like it's the beginning, the middle, and the end of defining athletics on the vast majority of campuses. And certainly right now in the middle of a pandemic, trying to decide whether we even have college sports in the fall, all seems to revolve around whether we can play football. So you're saying, let's reverse engineer this a little bit. Let's really look at across the board, why are we offering athletics for the track team as well as for the football team, as well as for the swimming team? What's the value that they get from the experience we provide?
Exactly. And that really, maybe you do that and you realize that, hey, nothing's going to change with track and field. Maybe you do that and you realize nothing's going to change with tennis or even, women's basketball. But having that information on the table, you're going to need that to make decisions in the future, because what we've seen is the landscape for college athletics is changing. And one of the issues we see today is the public's perception is driving a lot of the conversation. And anytime you don't have in place a firm idea of what this entity is supposed to represent or is supposed to do, it's very easy for anyone from the general public who, simply, their experience with college athletics is, we watch it on Saturdays or during bowl season or March Madness. Anyone from that demographic can come in and say, well, no, this isn't fair because this is what I think they should be getting, right? So you really want to paint that picture. And I think now we're seeing a real manifestation of what happens when you don't take those first initial steps.
I really agree. I have found that doing this podcast, many of my listeners are journalists and other folks in higher education who really thought they understood everything there was about college athletics. And then they listen to one particular segment and they say, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that's what was required. And so to me, the larger understanding of how complex this agreement is between a school and its athletes, and what the rights and responsibilities and the freedoms and the commitments that you have to make, anybody who comes at it from a legal viewpoint might look at it differently than I look at it as an educator's viewpoint, as somebody else as a journalist who's looking at reporting and looking at holes in the system. And so if we can all at least agree on a common framework, it seems like that would be a good place to start.
Right, absolutely. Or you take like you mentioned, the lawyer's perspective is going to be different. The professor's perspective is going to be different. The economist's perspective is going to be different, because for a lot of schools, college athletics is not a good business model at all, right? It really forces you to have those conversations, and then you really want to ask, okay, well, who is it that should decide what this looks like? That's the other part. Who are we listening to? Are we listening to the viewing public, who are the ones pouring money into some of these sports? Are we listening to the institutions? Are we listening to the student athletes? But I think you're exactly right.
that brings me exactly why I wanted to have you as a guest today, because you've really moved up in the hierarchy of things very quickly. You started off as the SAC chair in the Mountain West Conference, and then you're now on the NCAA Board of Directors. Tell us what that means and how significant of a role that is for you.
Well, it was a really big deal for me, right? I think, especially when you take into consideration kind of how everything started, right? I had just come off of, an Olympic trials run and had really exploded in the world of track and field relatively quickly. And I just wanted to do more. So when I got invited to that first leadership forum, just to learn more about how the NCAA structure worked, I wanted to learn what more I could do. I wanted to do more than just, be the athlete who is also, doing stuff academically. I wanted to contribute to the athletic community. And for me, taking it from both my institution, the University of New Mexico SAC, to the Mountain West of the National SAC, that's huge because I was able to acquire a perspective that at the time, no other student athlete had, right? You take in minority athlete, elite athlete, had to work with athletic directors on campus, had to work with conference administrators that were dealing with, interest groups that went beyond the University of New Mexico, obviously different schools, University of Wyoming, and then taking it to the national SAC, which really brought in a different dynamic because, hey, now we're thinking about different conferences. Now it's not just about Kendall, Spencer, the Mountain West. Now we're thinking about, well, what about the SEC? We're dealing with different revenue streams. We're dealing with different people, different beliefs. And that for me was really training because you don't really get a chance to have exposure to all those different views. And the type of practice that I was, blessed to have with, having those discussions, really, and knowing how to bring everyone to the table and think about different interests. So doing all that as a student athlete was huge. And it allowed me to not only get in the room, get a seat at the table, but it opened up other opportunities where, even before I was on the board and had gotten to that level, I had sat on, 4 or 5 other NCAA committees before that, competitive safeguards. So I was dealing with, concussion protocol, the Olympic Sports Liaison Committee. So I was dealing with, USOPC. So it's really all about perspective. And right now that's incredibly important because there are only a couple perspectives that you're really hearing. You're hearing from the public, you're hearing from political leaders, and you're hearing from a handful of athletic directors.
I really agree with that. So if you had a chance to reformulate or look at the structure as it is today, as you having an athlete voice, but maybe one of the only athlete voices at the highest levels, right? How would you look at the obstacles in front of you? What would you point out and say if a group of college presidents were sitting here? What would you say to them that they don't see that you see that limit the choices for an athlete's voice in this mix?
Mm-hmm. So of course this is all hindsight now because I've since rolled off of the board, but I think so when I was really active in that space with the board, we saw the unionization issues with Northwestern.
Right.
And I think that right there, when that happened, I was thinking, okay, there needs to be a better relationship with the government because at some point we're going to need some of these leaders to step in and help us restructure things. So I think, one of the 3 areas where I think I saw, years ago that should have changed was the relationship we had with our senators, with our congressmen and congresswomen. That was really important because it means a lot when you have certain senators coming out saying, hey, stand by the NCAA, I stand by intercollegiate athletics. We're going to make sure this is done right. Versus an us versus them type of relationship, which is a lot of what we unfortunately see now. I think, and really this is where, I guess I'll say might be a bit of a hot take. I think I would put less of an emphasis on public perception. I think one of the problems that the NCAA has faced over the past couple of years is they've really, they've kind of taken their hands off of their steering wheel, so much so that now the public's gotten, the public's driving the ship now.
Yeah.
Not so much that they're controlling the NCAA, but it only takes a couple people who are avid football fans who have influence to now look at what they see on TV and listen to what they hear about how social media and revenue streams work, to now write a letter to the people that represent them, and now it's an issue. And because of the limited involvement with intercollegiate athletics that the general viewing public has, it's a compelling area, and it's very easy to get behind it. And the people that represent us in the federal government, they listen to their constituents.
Right.
And so we've really let the narrative get out of control. And so that's the second area. And I think the third area, which is really, I think, what contributes to the issues in the second, is the way that student athletes are marketed. I think that the NCAA has, and again, I've been there for a lot of these conversations. I think they've worked very hard at trying to control that narrative. But I think the way that student athletes, that we market student athletes during the football games, during the basketball games, they don't highlight that student athlete experience. They usually when I think of the commercials that I see, I think of, the bowl games, and you see Clemson University commercial, and it'll show a clip of someone playing basketball. It'll show a clip of, people doing chemistry and biology and so on and so forth, but it won't actually show the student athletes doing any of that, which is a huge problem because it already puts there a dividing line between being an athlete at the school and being a regular student. And because of that, the public continues to keep this perception that those two things are separate. I think if student athletes were marketed in such a way during these big viewing audiences, the student athlete experience and what actually goes into being a student athlete on all these campuses and the benefits you get, I think the way the public would look at what we receive as student athletes would be entirely different. I think it'd be entirely different. I think if anything, they would say at a lot of schools that what we get is completely unfair compared to what their kids go to school for.
Oh, okay. So in other words, you'd say there start to be a perception of differences between what programs are able to offer and support in support of their athletes.
Right.
So your second point was really interesting to me, and I really haven't had this discussion with anybody else because, with your focus now as a graduate of Georgetown Law, congratulations. And living in DC, you really understand the important role of government, but also you emphasize the important role of your local legislators understanding that students are constituents too, right? So the NCAA has a really pretty strong lobbying arm to make sure that their views are heard whenever anything comes up on Capitol Hill. But as we've seen in name, images, and likenesses, a lot of this change has happened at the state level. And I would think that with the emphasis now on giving players the day off November 3rd this year to go and vote, there might be more of a chance for athletes to have a voice so that their local legislators know who they are and they know what their issues are. What do you say to that?
I think you're absolutely right. I think it should come as no surprise to someone that understands even the base level of name, image, and likeness that all this stuff is happening at the state level. Right. Name, image, and likeness, right of publicity rules, those are all state recognized rights. So you have to do that stuff at the state level. I think the problem is those representatives don't know who the student athlete voices are. I think a lot of people, even to this day, are still trying to learn about this idea of the Student Athlete Advisory Committee, right? And what we do and how hard we work and the type of changes that we've been able to create. And a lot of people think that there is no voice for student athletes. And maybe some of that is because of the way that we, publicize the group, maybe because That group is a part of each institution that it's seen as biased. But that really is one of the best ways to connect to these voices, right? You know, we have these advisory committees on each and every campus across the country. All of those committees report to a conference level advisory committee, which reports to the national advisory committee. And so anyone who's worked on any type of board knows that it's really that conglomeration of those voices that can give you the insight you want. I think the problem is the unwillingness to recognize those voices. I think people take issue with going for the NCAA SAC because unfortunately they've thought that we are biased before. They thought that we were, mere puppets of the NCAA, which couldn't be further from the truth. A lot of us have gotten into it with, of course, when I say gotten into it, I mean, we've had disagreements with different decisions, and we've had discussions with, the lobbying arm of the NCAA and different administrative decisions, but there's a vehicle in place that's incredibly organized, that we've worked very hard to put together and strengthen. And one of the reasons you really want to go after that group is because they're informed student athletes, which is what is so key to this entire discussion. It's not just the athlete that, yes, they're a Division I national champion, but now they got into this meeting room and you're asking them to make decisions, but they've never spoken to their athletic director or gotten a chance to understand how their university runs. It's a group of student athletes that's seen it at all levels, who can actually have those type of discussions with you. So I think you're absolutely right. You want to hook up with those student athletes, and at the state level, they need to recognize those groups.
Too many times I see on social media and other places, the SACs, the Student Athlete Advisory Committee, being championed for their community service outreach. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, how an administration would view athletes reaching out to their local legislators and talking about their experiences and the rights that they want to advocate on behalf of. So I think that dynamic, because SACs have relied on the institution to promote their efforts, and perhaps there's another platform, there's plenty of platforms out there for SACs to be able to also talk about what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think, maybe the future of this is to, do more in the student athlete advocacy space. I've been in talks with a couple former SAC members, former student athletes, current student athletes about putting something like that together that would allow all of those voices to sort of be grouped, and more importantly, be accessible.
Yeah. Speaking of groups that have coalesced in recent times, there's an active parent group called College Football Parents 24/7, pressing for more information and communication from their institutions about their sons returning to campus to play football. If you could offer that group some advice at this particular time, what might you say?
I think I would want each and every one of those parents to ask themselves, what are they really searching for? What is it that they're hoping to provide for their kids, right? Is it the opportunity to play? Is it the opportunity to play and potentially be recruited to the pros? I would ask them to be in constant communication with those coaches and the administrators at the institution. The NCAA, when it comes to those membership institutions, that's not really the key group. If I'm one of those parents, I'm not necessarily reaching out to the NCAA. My kid goes to Alabama. Alabama's the one that's going to make a lot of those decisions, and I need to know what they're going to do about my son playing football there, and they're often going to be a little bit more accessible too. But, I think, having your goals in mind and what it is you're really trying to accomplish is a big part of all this. I think everyone has to understand the space that we're living in right now. You're not just dealing with, this pandemic that has crippled a variety of institutions and, different interest spaces. But you're dealing with an upcoming election. You're dealing with this name, image, likeness issue that is now permeating throughout the country. And you're dealing with the fact that we didn't have March Madness last year, right? The NCAA, last I checked, gets over 80% of the revenue from that tournament alone, at least.
Yeah.
Right. So I think while, ask the questions, get the information, understanding that, a lot of these people they're waiting for the same information that all of us are. Yeah. And so finding ways to work with the institution and work with the conferences, I think is going to be really helpful. You can't give someone information you don't have yet.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I can only imagine the anxiety that all parents must be feeling,
Right.
sending their sons and daughters back to campus this fall. A lot of schools have made decisions already, but many schools haven't, particularly the Autonomous 5 and some of the other FCS schools. So if you were a student athlete, let's say going into your senior year, what concerns would you have? And what would you be asking your coaches at this point?
So painting it from the context that I would be coming into, which would be, let's see, my senior year, I would be, looking towards the Olympic Games. I'd be, again, elite level. I'm trying to win. I'm trying to win a national championship, sign a contract and then move forward. I would want to know athletically what that looks like in the future, right? So, if you postpone my season, do I get another year, right? Is that opportunity still going to be there? And then I would then begin to take a step back and work with the coaches and try to figure, okay, well, what does this look like? And then, which a lot of people forget, and I guess you can't really do this as much with sports like football, is that I'm going to the NGB, right? I'm going to the national governing body for that sport. If you're, a citizen here, and I'm asking, okay, well, what kind of opportunities are you guys providing? Because right now, I want to make sure that I've got a place to compete. As a track athlete, I've spoken to a lot of us in Olympic sports, and intercollegiate athletics is really the pipeline to the Olympics. A substantial portion of our medal winners and our qualifiers come from the college system. So when you take away those competitive opportunities, we've got Tokyo coming up next year, right? So what happens to that? What happens to those dreams and passions of student athletes, if you don't have it? That being said, I'm thinking about it also from the academic side, right? When I think about really what propelled me into the position that I am now, it's, I got injured my sophomore year of college and couldn't really compete. And so I had to really find other ways to create value. And that's when it sort of clicked in my head that, hey, I can't just do this academic thing. I can really do this academic thing. And so I really pursued, research opportunities and other degrees. And so, for me, it's what can I do? Right. If you're going to delay my season and you're going to provide me another one, do I need to be a 12 credit full-time student? What does that look like? What happens to my scholarship? Right. So I think I say all that to say this, the question that I would really ask for, for institutions in terms of looking at my well-being and the future is, what is it that you're prioritizing? As an administrator, as my coach, as the athletic director, I want to know how you see me in my sport and what role you see us playing in the next couple of years. Because as we've seen, schools have been dropping sports, that says a lot, right? So I would want to know what that looks like, and then I would conduct myself accordingly.
Yeah. Well, Kendall Spencer, we're going to leave it there, but this has been a fascinating conversation, and I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and really bringing it home that so many athletes like yourself are not football players, but have just as audacious goals, including winning and medaling in the 2021 Tokyo Olympics. So I want to wish you the very best in that. How is your training going?
It's going really well. I'm in Portland, Maine right now. My coach lives up here. My training partner lives up here. And so this was really the safest place for me to both train and study for the bar as, everything's been sort of delayed. But, I've been, again, staying involved with USA Track and Field, the NCAA, doing some stuff with the Night Commission now as well. So really hoping to use this time to create, a better space for athletes. And, hopefully we can all come out of this in a much better place.
I hope so too. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Karen.